Hi, friends. I'm Heather Miller, CEO and founder of social impact startup Grasshopper, talent acquisition and DEI specialist, mom of 2 humans and 3 fur babies, most under 4, former professional ballet and hip hop dancer, yoga teacher, interior designer, caregiver, provider, retirement planner, innovator, social connector, and the list goes on. As you can tell from my bio, I've always taken drive to the extreme, and for the most part, done pretty well juggling all of my hats. However, I say this on behalf of most of us, the past 3 years have been very challenging. My personal experience included moving to an unknown city, the unexpected death of my mother, and the birth of my first child 2 weeks later, launching a startup during maternity leave, the pandemic, building diversity strategies for a global corporation in the wake of George Floyd's death, another baby, and then, the icing on the cake, a layoff. I felt like I was approaching a midlife crisis with no space to do so. As a result, I've been thinking about balance and whether that's actually a thing. Join me as I speak with some amazing thought leaders and women in my life to understand how they keep the fire going and the lights on while staying sane. We'll explore drive, juggling priorities, taking no prisoners with your schedule, love and sickness, pursuing your dreams, enjoying the journey, and figuring out what is right for you. We hope these conversations help you err on the side of midlife epiphany versus midlife crisis. Welcome to Balanceness.
Good afternoon, or it's evening your time. Fatima, welcome to Balanceness.
Hi, Heather. It is evening. It's an exciting evening, and it's super great to speak to you tonight.
I'm so happy you're here, and we were just doing a little pre-chat, and I was doing like a bit of a, although I didn't ask this explicitly, maybe you actually even started with like, how are you feeling tonight? But at work we do the practice of like, what type of energy are you showing up with today?
Today.
Really like how that's phrased.
I love that.
Yeah, but thank you for asking me that before we started recording here. It was so nice to kind of just like unload a little bit of my actual feelings and let it be known to everyone having a little bit of a rough week. But anyways, we'll make it through this, and it feels really I just feel inspired every time I talk to you, and I think we've become a little bit of pen pals, via email. And every time I see an email come through, I feel optimism. I feel you're like probably someone like me who gets excited at the thought of like entrepreneurial ventures and ideas. And so I love talking to creative minds.
I must say, I love what you said because we live in this whole momentum of bringing ourselves into everything we do and being our full selves. And I feel that just by understanding a few lines of your life story, and then by chance being introduced to you, we've built this ability of communicating to each other from really far away, and then building almost like a I want to be your friend energy, that you're just sort of continuously figuring out how to, share ideas, collaborate. So I echo your thoughts. And I think that this is what we need. We need more unity. And we're going through times around the world that are actually quite confusing. That it's fascinating that, we've connected and we've established some good rapport, and here we are today. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. And just for everyone listening, I'm sitting in the United States, and Fatima is in Norway. And so we are far apart. And when Fatima, when we look at your LinkedIn, we've definitely, probably crossed continents at the same time. And we have similar experiences, I think, that drew us to each other, and so hopefully we'll get to share those with our audience here. But maybe let's start with you. I would do an introduction, but I always feel like it's better when my guest does, because you. So tell us everything, and we're talking about balance, so include all the parts of yourself.
Yeah, so introducing yourself is always a tricky one because it never feels that you can cover like the scope of who you are. But I was thinking about it, and I feel that to understand me is to understand my sense of adventure. I feel that I'm someone who is always interested and curious about the world, and that led me to not only travel but work internationally and build relationships that kind of made me into who I am. I'm a mother, a wife, I'm a sister. I am the kind of person that connects really well one-on-one. And I tend to have this bizarre shyness in group settings, even though I'm an extrovert. So it's super curious. And I'm just one of those people that have been living my life just seeking for purpose. And I think that sometimes it sounds a little like, phony to say something like that. But the reality is that I'm the daughter of immigrants who rebuilt their lives in the late 70s in Europe. And as an African girl being raised in Portugal, you have this sense of belonging somewhere. And that somewhere sometimes is really far away from where you are. So I feel that in the way that I, even at work, build relationships and try to understand what I can do, it has always been built up on understanding people. So I love people. I really love connecting with them, understanding them. So that makes me a people person. I love food. I love nature. I like to have cozy days and long days out and about exploring. So yeah, I'm just really a person that has some balance in not being consistent. I think that's pretty much a way of describing me.
I absolutely love that consistency and the inconsistency. I've never thought about that before, but that absolutely resonates with me. And also the seeking purpose. It is not to, like you said, phony. I was going to say woo woo. It's not at all. That is one thing that's fundamental to me. Like, I'm always trying to figure out, what is my purpose? How do I have impact? Where do I ease my restlessness in my, sense of direction? So that also really, really resonates with me. And so you kind of like touched on balance a little bit. And I want to hear what it means to you, because as we were just, talking about before this call, there's a lot on both of our plates. We both have kids that are the same age, and they're young kids, so it's a lot to juggle, and it's a lot to feel like you have to be everywhere at the same time. So what does balance mean for you?
That's probably something that I'm still working on, how to remain or find some balance, and how important it is in my life as well. I feel that I have a couple of life events, and primarily the death of my mother, which really opened up an eye-opener to the role that some people play in your life and how they bring you balance and bring you certainty and safety. So perhaps losing that pillar transformed me into trying to limit my exposure to people, to situations that could be hostile, at the same time being maybe a bit more assertive in my own voice. And then, working in technology and international environments, you have to find ways to not just be relevant based on what you contribute, but you also have to find ways to not carry yourself and let yourself go with taking on too much or trying to achieve too much. So I feel that there's an intersection between these keywords where I find balance, which is still thinking, still questioning, still being curious, but at the same time, trying to figure out what is that minimum requirement that I need in my life in order to be happy. And I think that a lot of it is the satisfaction of seeing my kids grow and seeing their happiness and experiencing their milestones, and then making sure that I'm setting priorities that allow me to fulfill that. And I think that in the last 2-3 years, I realized that it's actually about accepting where you are rather than continuously thinking about the journey you are hoping to achieve, or perhaps, you know, the places that you're coming from. And I think that I'm living a very different life than the environment in which I was raised. And I'm also raising my children in a completely different country and culture than the one I was raised in. So then having an understanding of your emotions and having an understanding of what makes you feel content is a way of being balanced. So it is a hard question, you know, but it feels like it's a combination of a lot of things. There are days that it's just about working out. It's just about having the energy to make that schedule, go to the gym. And then other days is just fulfilling the tasks that you've been procrastinating for several days or so ever. So I think that acceptance, perhaps, I don't know, Heather, it's interesting, it's difficult. And I think women are living an age where we can actually craft and design our lives so that we can experience different aspects of our personality and even our career development. That perhaps finding balance is something that will continuously evolve, and you just have to accept the fail fast and move forward into a new experience that might bring you more fulfillment. So I don't know, you have good questions, and I already feel a certain level of stamina raising, you know, as I speak to you. So I feel that this moment here gives me balance. And I think that that's perhaps a reflection of how we started this conversation, making connections, allowing yourself to have that vulnerability to be who you are, and at the same time, be affirmative and quite assertive towards achieving what you believe you need to achieve.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful answer. I took so many notes to come back to. But you did mention that you grew up, and was it in the suburbs of Lisbon, but not
Indeed.
originally from, were you born there?
No, I was born there. Yeah, I was born in Lisbon, in the city of Lisbon, and then my parents left Guinea-Bissau in the late 70s and early 80s. So my father in the late 70s, my mom in early 80s, which used to be a Portuguese territory during the colonial period. So then they were both Portuguese citizens, but then with the beginning of the colonial conflict, like in many other African countries, a lot of these younger youth, African-born European citizens, basically were in between what to do. Do we follow the culture and perhaps social setting that we were assimilated into, and then go to Portugal and become a refugee and build your life there? Or do you stay and then bear the consequences of conflict? So then my father was at the time in a political circle. So then he made a decision that he had to leave. And then my mom followed. So then I was born and raised in Lisbon, but in an environment where everybody was from, at least my community, everybody was from a ex-Portuguese colony. So then you had African countries, you had Indian countries, so from India, both from India and Pakistan, because of Kenya and Mozambique, and then Portuguese that would come from there, some Chinese from Macau, a lot of South Africans. So it was a huge melting pot.
It was just
so yeah, it's insane.
Wow.
Really insane.
I Toronto and thought Toronto was somewhat of a melting pot, but this actually sounds incredible, but also incredibly confusing also.
It is. I think it's probably something that one day we should have a conversation about, because I perhaps represent a demographic of many first generation born Africans who are Europeans. So you'd see the same thing in France, Spain, in the UK, Belgium. I mean, all these countries who played a strong role in this colonization across Africa. So then you'd be born in Europe, but you are African, but you are raised with a sense of, you know what, you're actually European because everybody joined Europe around that time. And then you just have this like really intersecting view on who you are. And I think I never really fitted in to one dimension of who I was. So then perhaps that inspired me to seek education abroad and then work abroad.
I was actually going to say, there are benefits to what you experienced. And I do want to hear your story because, you know, we talked about you eventually becoming a top performer at Google. And so how did you make that transition? I want to hear about all of your choices and all the adventures and how your curiosity led you there. And sometimes I feel like if you don't have the most solid hold on your own identity and you have questions, it does lead you to find the answers. And sometimes it can lead you to interesting places. And so you probably, I want to hear about the opportunities that you built for yourself as you were, quote unquote, working it out.
Yeah, thank you for helping me take that journey and speak with you about that. So indeed, so I went to study in Wales, so in the UK, in the United Kingdom, and I did my undergrad there. And the reason why I ended up there was because all of my older siblings and also my cousin had at some point in their education studied English abroad or worked in a summer, and then they sort of loved the whole idea. London was a place that most youth at the time wanted to be in. So then I knew that my parents would be very disappointed if I decided to do, some sort of like, I'm going to go abroad and study language, So I said, okay, if I ever do that, I will do it as, I'm going to university and I'll try to do it in the right way. So that would happen. So as you can tell, I was a, goody good shoes, playing volleyball and just being a very good student for a good part of my youth. So then I basically went to UK, and then from there I finished my education, and then London was the place to be because that's the biggest city, and I had some friends who were also relocating there. So then I thought, okay, I will finish and graduate. Wasn't really thinking that I would go to Portugal because then I had already been living in the UK for 4 years. So then I went to London and I was temping for a while. I did like small contract jobs in a couple of startups, looking into, supporting technical product development or using my language skills. And this is where it came from, to help localize. And this was interesting. It was a Russian startup based in London that was effectively trying to find patterns of how people behave online. So when you're looking for information, what type of keywords do you use, right? So then I actually became quite good at it because I liked the topics that I was covering. So I was actually covering sports, and I covered, I think, education, media, and maybe it's like current events. So then it was easy for me to connect with those topics. And then my job was effectively to create lists in different languages with keywords in a succession of how you would naturally look for things and then pass that information to engineers who would then program it, right? I didn't have a clue of what was the value of that task. I knew I could do the task, but I didn't have the clue. And then I started asking questions. And I remember building a really good relationship with Nicole Lesko, who's actually the product manager at the time, that I still admire her. And she, I think, gave me a lot of good energy, where she explained to me how online advertising actually worked and what we were doing there and what we were building. So then the startup was a bit unstable. I then decided I'm going to take that skill, what I just learned, behavioral targeting, the ability of understanding how a brand can connect to people and how companies can use time spent online. From that, I ended up in a technology company that is acquired by Google at my very, very early stage. So then I applied for a job at DoubleClick, and DoubleClick was in the process of being acquired by Google. And I even remember the sensation in the office. I had been there just a few days. I think it was basically 1 to 2 weeks I had been there. And there was this commotion of people going back and forth. There was like a large table, bottle of champagne, and and then the managing director comes in and he says, well, it is confirmed today, and it will be announced in New York at like our lunch hour, New York, start of the day, that we were acquired by Google. And there's a huge commotion in the room. And honestly, at the time, I was like, yeah, I know Google, but is it really like just a great thing that we were acquired by Google? I was really junior, I was like 1 year out of university, and that was it. So I joined Google through an acquisition, and I was fearless because I then understood what Google was, and I was very specialized in that specifically task that Google DoubleClick acquisition was representing. And that was the tipping point where Google decided to use that technology to start integrating advertising monetization across Google search, YouTube, display, and so forth. So then I basically was in this moment where I could use my skills to be very relevant to a wider part of the organization. So sometimes you start with a stigma that you were acquired, so you're not really a Googler. So I actually felt, you know what, I am a Googler. I love the world. I love people. I do know evil. And I think I started basically carrying myself in the organization. I remember being in the office and having lunch with different people across the organization every other day of the week. So then I was building relationships and understanding how the business worked. And then I understood that volunteering was something very valuable at Google, that you could volunteer your time to talk to others about your role or share skills or teach the languages that you know. So I would always sign up to like, yeah, I can totally do a Google to Google class on Portuguese, or do a Google to Google class about Africa. And I think just living the company culture made me get that passport, right? I became a Googler. And then I started seeking opportunities, and perhaps not in a very intentional manner, but I would tell my manager things that I was interested in, and he would respond with good direction on work I should do in order to get there. So then I felt, you know what, I feel like I keep getting that feedback of work. And I said, I think I'm ready for this. And I think I'm really ready to explore how can I make my competences more relevant in environments that I'm familiar with, and utilize my skills, because I'm a person who learned a few languages and I really want to utilize that. So I think he liked that energy. I proved that I was being serious about it. And within a couple of years after the acquisition, I then relocated to Spain, where I was able to support the deployment of that same technology, but in Spain. So then it was almost like transferring something that I already knew into a new market. So while it was a, let's say, horizontal transition, so I didn't really become more senior or something, I got a promotion, but I was basically promoted and still doing the same role, I was able to experience what it really means to be at Google, because suddenly you are exposed to a smaller market. So Spain was a small market in the UK, but it was a market where the tradition towards advertising and the tradition towards working with brands had a lot of decorum. Like, you really knew how to interact with them. You really knew how to get into the culture. And me being so unlike most of the Googlers, both physically and ethically, but I was also different because I came from the technology side. I was acquired in a technology acquisition. So then I had a different competence, and I think that fitted quite well. And my time in Spain was when I woke up to realize, oh my goodness, I can actually benefit a lot through this experience, because I really want to see the world, and Google is everywhere. And while I like being in Spain, I'm one step away from home. Like, Portugal is just next door. It was like 1 hour flight. And how much of the world will I see if I continue in Spain versus exploring the same experience in parts of the world that I don't know? And virtually this conversation I'm having with you is almost quote unquote of me speaking to a friend, describing my decision to relocate then to Singapore. where the same skill set was required. Here, I was coming in with a bit more seniority. I now had 4 or 5 years of experience of working at Google. And then I was coming into a region, it's a regional office with Southeast Asia and parts of North Asia as well. I was able to train agencies, speak to advertisers, sometimes be involved in some policy projects. So then I think it was really where I blossomed, and then I felt that I really adore this experience, and I feel that this company is rewarding my ability to be patient about, how quickly I want to grow vertically. And they're rewarding me by actually understanding that I have a potential and that potential could be developed. So in a very humble way, I think I understood when was the right time to ask for something, accept the feedback, accept the work that needs to be done to get what you want to, and ask for help. I remember asking for help, asking questions, asking people, for how long have you been in a company? Tell me about your journey. How did you solve that problem? So just being very open, very real. And I miss that. I've now left Google. I ended up working there for 13 years, and I've left Google in 2020, so it's coming up to 4 years, and I have these wonderful memories of what it meant to be at work. It helped me to feel empowered to solve bigger problems, and I think that's probably the direction that my career has taken. Problems that matter, that give me purpose, that are more human. And then really understand that Google is an environment that thinks in the future. You're constantly thinking about the future and how you solve for that. So then I have this restlessness where I'm at work, and sometimes I know that there's a journey that needs to be taken, and I'm often impatient about the journey because I feel that there's always a solution, right? Because that's the way that Google really pushes people through. So I'm now, I guess is it cold turkey? Is a type of expression that could be used where you live that type of environment to somewhat understand what that environment meant for you. And that's exactly where I am. I don't think I miss it to return, but I value it a lot. I value the people that I've met. So to answer your question, how does me, a person from Lisbon, a little girl that was so uncertain about what it really meant, and I think that I became a top performer at Google because I realized that if I'm able to get things done, and if I'm able to do it with passion, I will at least learn something. And then thinking about the reward too early in that journey might tire you, because then you optimize the wrong things and you optimize the wrong energy. So I feel that, I was promoted in every single role I did at Google, and I felt very happy with the type of feedback and the type of, let's say, enablement that environment meant. So then I never felt that there was a limit. If I received a lot of rejections in this journey, even while at Google, there was projects that were shut down. There were roles that became less sexy. There were, roles that I applied for and I wouldn't get them, and I just wouldn't get them. And I think that really helped me because I felt that at least I always know why. I always understand why. And that's what I think it's the value of an organization that attracts people from all over the world, that is impacting people's lives, was their ability to always have a justification for why we do what we do and why we prioritize the way we prioritize. And that's perhaps a lesson into the future, right? Into making decisions about the environments that you are in. Do you have answers to your questions, and do things respond to your intuition of what is right? Probably I'm going into different topics now and making this conversation super fluid, but your questions are just
that's great. You're covering a lot of ground here, and a lot of what I planned to cover anyways. And what struck me in everything that you were saying is that perhaps sometimes the naivete of youth and sort of the lack of intentionality was a good thing. I think these days, as we are forward thinking, we keep harping on, okay, I must be mindful about this decision, and sometimes, you know, whimsy can serve us really well, and it sounds like it did for you. And I'm curious, um, you eventually left Google for, as in your words, a less known recycling company, but I think there was probably some future thinking in that. So I want to hear about that decision, and I also want to hear about the industry. And I think at some point you went back for another degree in energy management and systems technology. So I want to hear about that leap as well.
Yeah, thank you for it. You know what? It's super interesting. I think what happened in between Google and me now working at Tomra is perhaps also something that I think will clarify some of these questions. So while I was in Asia, I was working in that environment of Google advertising platforms. So how do we optimize engagements with brands and consumers? And I was traveling a lot, going to these locations. I was spending a lot of time in Indonesia, a bit in Thailand, and going a bit around the region, and just realizing that I'm feeling a bit privileged because I'm coming in to these markets to have discussions with large brands, you know, Unilevers and other like CPG brands from a global perspective that are also located there. You know, having these discussions about branding and digitizing, where there are serious issues that these companies are dealing with. It's access to energy, water management, you know, ensuring that there is mobility so people can come to work because public service is so. And that brought me back to where I came from. It brought me back to understanding I got the opportunity to travel and work around the world. And now I'm here facing a reality in Indonesia that is quite similar to the infrastructure challenges that I know we have in Africa. And while I never lived in Africa, I visited a lot and traveled a bit to work there, but I never lived there. I still feel that connection. So then I started feeling, you know, I think I'm happy with what I'm doing, but that cannot be the end for me. I really want to be at Google and try to save the world and, you know, kind of transform everything. And I was passionate about energy management. I was passionate about renewables, and I gained an interest and I was learning a lot. And I applied for a role that Google started to make some, you know, decisions in that space. I applied for a role and I was flat out rejected. And the person who kind of was leading that department, he just kind of, he was very good and he knew, because I will explain to you, like he really knew what he was doing, but I was so frustrated because I felt like, but you know what, I do so good. I have really good feedback. I have great performance. Why isn't he? And he just pushed me back. And then I reapplied for that role months later. And then, you know what, he rejected me again. I said, you know, let me try to have a meeting with him. We had a discussion and he said, listen, Fatima, you clearly have the passion and you clearly want this role. You have the skills. I have no doubt that you do well. But if you want to enter the space, if you want to be part of the sustainability and renewables community, you have to formalize your knowledge. You have to go and learn about this. You have to go and take a test, you know, go and really. And I sort of, it was a wake up moment because I felt, oh my goodness, this is so true. You know, I was backing my ability to grow based on my performance in that environment, but maybe not respecting the community of that industry and not kind of. So this is what inspired me to do that transition. I basically continued working full time, and then I joined what they refer to as an executive master's, which is the ability for you to do a master's program while you are still employed, and then you take breaks every 3 months to basically go and take face-to-face classes and then do your like studies and tests as well. So I've joined that, and funnily enough, I've met my husband in that process, which is super interesting. So I was there in Asia figuring out, okay, I should go and study energy. And then it's this triangulation. Where should I do this? Because I can do it all over the world. I could do it in Asia. I could do it in the States. Where shall I do this? And then I felt, you know what, I should do it in Europe, because that's where I will go to at some point in my life. I will be back in Europe. I should do it in locations that have a good reputation for resource management and in an environment that I don't know. And then I started looking for universities. There was an option in Germany, and then there was an option in Norway. And this was BE in connection with Berkeley and IFP in France. So then, again, in this international environment, I joined the program. At the end of it, I reapplied for a position in that same department that had been rejected me. And I didn't get the role that I initially was seeking, but I achieved another role, which was in access and energy, which was the international view of Google Fiber in emerging markets. And our purpose there was to bring connectivity and also solve for the challenges of access to electrification, because you needed both in order to digitize a community. So then I did a business development role for that project for 3.5, 4 years. And this was fascinating because I was then now working in hardware. So this was, in fact, it's infrastructure. It's no longer software. It's basically, we are looking at ways to develop permanent infrastructure that will be in the country. And I was part of launching parts of the network in Uganda. And then we launched in Kumasi in Ghana. And then we had a lot of exploratory work in Mozambique and Malawi, but then Malawi was a challenging market for us. And then eventually later in Liberia. So this was insane, because then I'm rotating back closer to home. I got the chance to work in the continent that I've been so afraid of being there, but also excited about being there, because it was this understanding that this is home, but I've not really, wasn't raised in Africa. I was an African raised abroad. So it was a fascinating experience to feel so welcome and to feel so unique. And something that I must share with you was how one day I was having a conversation about diversity, inclusion, and these topics with one of my colleagues, Sam in Ghana, and he says to me, you guys as in Africans born in Europe, you have this thing about diversity and inclusion, but you know what? We here in Ghana, we don't really, because we are so included. We are so we are so represented. And I felt that was amazing. And it was so true. And it was something that helped me, again, understand my privileges. It's like you see the world from one angle, and that angle sometimes distorts your view on what is valuable about yourself and about the environments that you are in, and how these discussions and this fight for inclusion was something so not for the people that I was working with. It was almost like, an eye-opener. And I value that the time, I value the moments that I've had working again for Google in that space, because it humbles you when you are now using this technology, these investments, this like flashiness, to now solve for real issues, to go in and have discussions with, regulators of telecoms, and really trying to understand how can you bring the solution and at the same time address the problems towards the public, ensuring that affordability is there, that you're enabling also the access to devices, access to content that matters to people. And it was nothing to do with advertising. It was around education. It was around information that is valuable. So this was amazing. Google decided to somewhat spin out that project into a new company in collaboration with the IFC and Mitsui and another investor in South Africa, Convergence Partners. So then I was then part of overseeing that transition. So then I worked as a business development manager to ensure the spin out of this project into a new company, and then support some of the services that are needed in between. And that again was an amazing experience, because I wasn't really planning on that. but he allowed me to understand this dimension around how do you negotiate these types of M&A agreements, and at the same time, how do you ensure that the partners you are bringing in are partners that will have a long-term commitment to these types of projects. And the company is still alive, they're still growing and in creating a lot of impact. So then it's something that, although I'm no longer involved, I still feel it's part of my professional DNA and cemented my need to pursue a career in sustainability and infrastructure that goes towards helping the environment, because we need it as humanity.
I'm so fascinated by this journey, and I feel like we need to have part 2 of podcast to get deeper into some of this. But I feel you sort of insinuating that there's trends in this industry that make it particularly viable for underrepresented women. And I kind of want to touch on that a little bit. And then, like I said, we may need to do part 2.
Yeah, I think, first of all, thank you for considering that and for bringing me these reflective questions. So yes, so we're facing a challenge globally, or many challenges globally, when it comes down to our relationship with products, our need of consuming, our need of generating emissions and producing waste, ultimately. And those two aspects are fundamental to how we, as a society, believe we should live, right? We should acquire things, should have things to dispose of them. But unfortunately, there aren't enough solutions and enough regulation and enough policies that are ensuring that items, emissions, waste is managed properly. And I feel that I'm working at a company now, Tomra. We develop technology, both hardware and software, that helps or aims at enabling a resource revolution. So we feel that, and we see that everything that we consume, so packaged containers and any other type of materials, are a resource that can be recycled into a value chain. And ideally, the value chain should remain as standardized, where you basically do, if you have a bottle, you recycle that into a bottle, rather than reducing the quality of that material and creating a t-shirt or creating other items. So we really believe in this idea of a clean loop recycling. And when you consider the variety of ways on how waste is being disposed of how consumers are being triggered to consume, there's no technology in the world that is able to process that is able to interpret that. And I think that as women and as people who represent a underrepresented profile, you are able to bring a rationale into these processes that enables any company, any business or technology to think differently and to address very specific challenges. So we need more entrepreneurs that can think of ideas on how to manage waste, who can think of ideas of how to utilize existing technologies. And that's sometimes something that is quite interesting, because we're pushing entrepreneurs to have new ideas, new technology, new solutions, where in reality, there's a lot of items that can be used in different ways, right? Just finding new business models for existing technology. And I keep feeling this. I keep going into conversations. I was part of a workshop recently in Morocco, which was discussing this whole idea around how can African nations build better standards for recycling. And the types of challenges that are being faced in countries like Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, you name it, across the continent, are very unique, and they need a bottom-up view. So I really feel that this is a time where more people should consider a career in climate, and they can everybody can transfer their skill set. This is almost a new industry. We didn't talk about sustainability jobs, if you were to look back 15 years ago or so forth. Now it's really becoming a structured industry. So if people who are hearing have a passion for the environment that they are in and have a passion for preserving the environmental culture that they have around them, really try to transfer your skills into the value that you can bring. And then from that point on, find companies, find ideas, find incubators, or find investors that are trying to solve similar problems. And I would love that, because it then would mean more women in tech, more women of color in positions that are representing solutions that are needed for communities that are often forgotten. And it would also mean that we are creating solutions that are not leaving people behind. And that's something that I'm really focused. And sometimes even while I worked in a startup a few years ago, it was something that really bothered me. It was understanding that while I wanted to represent some aspects of my own view on leadership and my own views on evolving a level of inclusion in the work environment, I was still in the domain of perhaps investors with a limited view on what it means to be inclusive, perhaps investors that were still a bit cynical about the objectives of the type of growth that you are seeking and the trade-offs you have to make in terms of the quality of the product. So it is challenging, but I think it's important because companies need it. Companies need more diversity, and they need to be able to not be afraid of the unknown. So underrepresented, profiles of employees can really help navigate that.
Thank you for such a beautiful answer. And I'm going to take the opportunity to pause here, because I really do think that we need a part two. So thank you so much for all of your wisdom and for sharing it with our community and everyone on the line. Stay tuned.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you for supporting another episode of Grasshopper's Balanceness podcast. If you liked it, please rate, review, and subscribe on our Apple and Spotify pages. Send me a screenshot at hello@grasshopper.com. That's GRASSHOPPHER to enter yourself into this episode's surprise raffle. And be the first to hear about upcoming episodes and events by signing up for Grasshopper's newsletter, which can be found on our website. Happy balancing until the next time.